The Morgan Curve, the proof behind the monuments of Mars. Copyright 1999, Morgan Communications Products. In September of 1988, Nightline, hosted by Ted Koppel, did a show about Mars, which included the face on Mars. One of the guests, ex-administrator of NASA, Thomas Paine, was asked by Mr. Koppel about the face on Mars. Mr. Paine commented, "We think that's a wind-blown anomaly, a trick of light and shadow." Then the image of the D&M pyramid was displayed. Once again, Mr. Paine was asked his opinion of this object. He again replied, "We think that's a wind-blown anomaly too." Koppel then credited Richard Hoagland's book for where the pictures came from. I sent a letter to Mr. Hoagland explaining what took place on the show, and a copy of an article from the New York Times, August 28, 1924. The article talked about us receiving radio signals from Mars. Ted used this information in the opening of the show. Hoagland told me that he had been invited out to Goddard Space Flight Center to speak to the scientists and engineers, but rumor had it that NASA was trying to prevent it from taking place. On December 19, 1988, I attended the Goddard lecture, but the camera crew assigned for ABC was not there. None of the press who had confirmed they would attend showed up. Later I discovered that NASA had sent out a press release that very day announcing a briefing about Mars at the National Press Club. All of the members of the press went there instead of to Goddard, except for me. Thus began my quest for the truth. Keith B. Morgan. The Cydonia area has enough strange structures to pique anyone's curiosity about its artificiality. So why is NASA not interested? Do they already know something we don't? The face first caught everyone's attention in 1976, but then was dismissed by NASA, who said if there was a second photo at a different sun angle, the face would disappear. There was a second image, and it revealed that the face was two images in one, the face of a humanoid and that of a lion. The fort, another strange structure, has a set of walls that completely defy any natural formations. It consists of a set of walls 1,500 feet high, and straight walls, mind you, that form a triangle which has one angle of 45 degrees. The D&M Pyramid. There is a pyramid in China in the Forbidden Zone, which is constructed in the same manner and has the same size as the D&M Pyramid, but it's a four-sided pyramid. As you can see in this blow-up, the five-sided pyramid has 5 corners. This overlay displays exactly how it would look. Vincent DiPietro and Greg Mulinar discovered the five-sided pyramid, which Richard Hoagland named the D&M Pyramid in his book. The pyramid points due north, and the face is offset to north by 19.5 degrees. The City Square, another super strange structure, contains a configuration of objects that again defy any natural formation. The latest images from the Mars Global Surveyor now confirm beyond all doubt that this is not a natural formation. One of the mounds of the city square has its own set of walls, aligned and configured in the same way as the fort's walls. This is little more than coincidence. How many times does a flipped coin have to come up heads in a row before you realize it's a two-headed coin? The discovery made by myself and Earl Torn, coined the Morgan Curve by Dr. Stanley McDaniel, added overwhelming proof that these objects were not natural. Nature can hide the structures over time, but it can't hide the math. The major structures' positions had already reflected the angles within the D&M pyramid, but my discovery of the mounds that, when connected, formed a curve with their spacing doubling as they went out in the curve was more than just coincidence. The next thing, which is quite unusual, is that the distance from the 6th mound to the 4th mound is repeated as you travel from the 4th along the same axis. This creates a tangent and then a ray across the curve. Using angles to demonstrate the spacing, one can clearly see the difference in degrees between the mounds as being twice that of the next. The angle 463 is 20 degrees, but it is actually 19.5 when dead center through mound 3. The difference between angles 463 and 462 is 10 degrees, while the difference between angles 462 and 461 is 5 degrees. Angle 436 is 40 degrees, making the pattern from smallest to largest 5, 10, 20, and 40 degree angles. This clearly shows the spacing to be exponential. During the creation of this animation, I discovered that a 45 degree angle placed the end of an exact length ray on another mound, while passing through another mound with the same distance as the 4th. Errol Tarn later discovered that the X and Y axis were also plotted in similar mounds. Errol discovered that the Y axis passed through the mounds of the city square, through a mound on the corner of the pyramid structure that the curve starts out from around, passes through the 5th mound that did not fit the exponential spacing pattern of the others, and ended at the D&M pyramid's apex. The x-axis starts at the end of the ray, goes through 2 other mounds as it travels to the tip of the walls of the fort. Again, the coin comes up heads, and the curve falls right into place. Earl said, "I laid my graph down over the area, and everything fell into place." The Morgan curve turns out to be the logarithmic function of E curve. The constant E shows up again and again throughout the Cydonia region. Since I found the majority of the mounds, it would have been very hard for Earl to have made the X and Y axis fit this model, unless it was real. Follow the Y and the X axis and observe the mounds that cut through. Earl said that he had several curves to choose from when trying to determine which curve this could be. He decided to try the logarithmic function of E curve because E, 2.7, shows up again and again throughout the entire Cydonia complex. He said that when he laid his graph over the area, everything fell into place. Not only was the curve there, but the X and Y axis were plotted in these mounds too. I hadn't thought about the X and Y axis, even though I knew they were part of plotting curves. I realized at that moment that this was real, because I had found the majority of the mounds. There was no way Earl could have manipulated anything to make this fit. When he had told me what he had done, I went behind him and carried out my own measurements and found that the 5th mound was part of the y-axis. This explained why it didn't fit the exponential pattern when I first made the discovery. The y-axis went right through 2 of the mounds in the city square, out through another mound on the corner of the large pyramid which I hadn't noticed. The y-axis then continued through the 5th mound and right up to the center of the D&M pyramid. These are 2 images of the first 3 mounds that start the curve. The left image is an enhancement of the Viking photo, and the right is from Mars Global Surveyor, but enlarged. In the Global Surveyor photo, you can see ridges that run down the side of the large pyramid structure and connect up with each of the smaller mounds. These are not grooves, and the mounds are not craters. Their light reflections clearly indicate this. You can see the doubling in the spacing taking place in these first three mounds. Because the mounds are connected to the main structure by these ridges, this is another indication that they are not natural in their formation. These mounds did not just rise up out of the flat plain with these characteristics by themselves, nor are they sediment buildup from runoff from the main structure. If that were the case, the ridges would be gullies. These ridges might be tunnels leading to the smaller structures. These objects have eroded over thousands of years, so they will appear more natural than not, but the math can't be hidden. How many times must a flipped coin come up heads in a row before you realize that it's a two-headed coin? Any researcher that has studied Cydonia will notice that the number of coincidences that appear at Cydonia has well surpassed any reasonable number of coin flips. This Mars Global Surveyor image shows fair detail of the city square and the Morgan curve. Notice that the smaller mound in the city square has a set of triangular walls just like the fort. The ridges running down the side of the main structure can clearly be seen connecting the first three mounds to the structure, except that the third mound's ridge appears to have been disrupted by an impact crater. The shape of the first mound is more rounded, while the second is more oval, and the third is clearly oval. The lighting of these structures continue to reflect large amounts of light, even though this picture is at a 10-degree sunrise, and the Viking images were at 10 and 30-degree sunsets. Here, the smaller mound of the city square and the fort are compared to one another. Remember now, the fort has 1.5 miles length to it, while the city square mound is the size of a small shopping center or mall, or a few football fields in size. The angles within the walls of the fort are identical to the angles within the walls of the city square mound. Nature does not make straight lines, high walls, or even duplicates itself on a second level. If we were to overlay the two sets of walls, they would match. The true orientation of the walls in the city square mound are 180 degrees out from that of the fort's walls. What's the odds of all of these things happening in nature? The exponential spacing is also repeated in the spacing between the major structures, as pointed out by Dan Drazen in Richard Hoagland's book. The back side of the fort has a curious trident shape, which again appears in another area of Cydonia, along with similar other structures that don't conform to natural formations. Anyone who tries to dispute the evidence I have presented in the Morgan curve is either ignorant of scientific method and probability, or they're part of a massive cover-up. Disputing this evidence is like looking at pictures of the Earth from Galileo as it passed by on its way to Saturn, and proclaiming the Earth is still flat.